40-year-old prince never touched anyone, until Black Maid begged to stay after work. The bells toll across the frozen palace halls. A man who has never known the warmth of another's hand sits alone, wrapped in silence. And then one winter night she whispers a plea. "Please, let me stay after work." What begins as a small mercy shakes the very throne. Because she is no ordinary maid, her past hides truths powerful enough to break kingdoms. Whispers of scandal ripple through the court. Torches burn, chains rattle, and a tribunal waits to tear her down. But when the untouched prince dares to reach for her hand before all the realm, the world gasps. Is this the moment he loses crown and country, or the moment love rewrites destiny? Who will win cold tradition, or a love too dangerous to ignore? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The grand winter feast blazed with warmth and light in Prince Leopold's palace. 100 beeswax candles flickered in golden holders, casting dancing shadows on the oak-paneled walls. The sweet notes of lutes and violins floated through the air, mingling with the rich aromas of roasted meats and spiced wine. At the high table, Prince Leopold sat rigid and alone, his plate barely touched. His angular face remained expressionless as he watched the revelry before him with distant eyes. The nobles cast furtive glances his way between bites of venison and roasted goose, their whispers barely hidden behind jeweled hands. 40 years old and still unwed, murmured a countess behind her fan. They say he hasn't touched another soul since the fever in his youth. Such a waste, her companion replied. The line of Saxony must continue. The prince gave no sign he heard them, though his fingers tightened slightly on his silver goblet. He had long grown used to such whispers. As the night wore on, the guests gradually departed in their carriages, leaving behind scattered crumbs, spilled wine, and the heavy silence that follows merriment. The servants emerged from the shadows to begin their work, gathering plates and brushing away debris from the feast. Among them moved Delilah, her dark hands efficient as she stacked trenchers and gathered fallen napkins. Her mixed heritage drew occasional stares from the other servants, but she worked with quiet dignity, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. The night had been long, and her feet ached fiercely. When most of the other servants had finished their tasks and departed, Delilah approached Herr Matthias, the palace steward. Her voice was soft but clear. Might I remain here by the fires for a while, sir? The garret is so cold tonight, and my bones are weary." The steward frowned, his lined face stern in the firelight. "It isn't proper, girl. Your shift is done." "Please," Delilah whispered, hugging her arms around herself, "just for a little while. I'll tend the fires myself." "I cannot make exceptions," Matthias began, but another voice cut through the quiet hall. "Let her stay." Both servant and steward turned in surprise. Prince Leopold stood in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by hallway torches. He stepped forward, and the firelight revealed an unusual expression on his typically mask-like face, something almost like uncertainty. "Your Grace," Matthias bowed deeply. "We didn't realize you were still about." "The maid may remain by the fires," the prince said, his voice rough from disuse. "It is a bitter night." Delilah dropped into a deep curtsy. "Thank you, Your Grace. You are most kind." As she straightened, she inadvertently stepped closer to the prince. Her hand brushed against his as she steadied herself, a fleeting touch lighter than a feather. Both froze at the contact. Prince Leopold drew in a sharp breath. The simple touch, the first he had allowed in countless years, sent a jolt through his entire being. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled it back, and something shifted in his ice-blue eyes. Matthias quickly ushered himself out with another bow, leaving Delilah alone in the great hall with the prince. She settled quietly on a low stool near the largest fireplace, careful to keep her eyes downcast as proper. After a moment, she began to hum softly, an old sailor's hymn her father had taught her in childhood. The melody rose and fell like gentle waves, speaking of far-off shores and the comfort of coming home. Prince Leopold remained in the doorway, silent and still. But instead of leaving, he lingered, watching the firelight play across Delilah's face as she hummed. Something stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the flames before him. The simple beauty of her voice touched a part of his soul he had thought long frozen. Neither spoke. Yet in the quiet of the great hall, with only the crackling fire and a humble hymn between them, something profound and delicate had changed. The prince stood in the shadows, letting the melody wash over him, unable to turn away from this unexpected moment of grace. Dawn crept over the palace walls, painting the servants' hall in pale winter light. The smell of fresh bread and sound of pewter mugs clinking filled the air as servants gathered for their morning meal. Steam rose from bowls of thin porridge as kitchen maids and footmen huddled close on wooden benches, warming themselves before the day's duties began. Delilah sat quietly in her corner, breaking her bread into small pieces. She could feel the weight of stairs and hear the whispers that followed her every move this morning. "Did you hear?" Agnes, a chambermaid, leaned close to her companion. Little Martha saw her near his Grace's chambers last night, long after the feast ended. "Bold as brass, that one," came the reply, loud enough for Delilah to hear. "Thinking she can catch a prince's eye with her foreign ways." Delilah's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her eyes on her plate. The bread turned to ash in her mouth as more whispers reached her ears. "Mark my words," said Cook, her voice heavy with warning. "The nobles will call her worse than temptress if she's noticed again. They'll say she's bewitched him, they will. Best keep to the shadows where we belong." Sarah, one of the older maids, touched Delilah's shoulder gently. "They're right, dear. Nothing good comes from catching a noble's attention. Remember poor Betty from the Duke's household?" Before Delilah could respond, Herr Matthias's stern voice cut through the chatter. "Delilah, a word." She followed the steward to his small office, heart pounding. The morning light barely penetrated the narrow window as he closed the door behind them. "You spoke too freely last night," he said, his face grave. "It isn't proper for a servant to address his grace directly, no matter the circumstance. You must understand your place." "I meant no disrespect, sir," Delilah said softly. "I was only asking to stay warm." "Nevertheless," Matthias began, but a knock interrupted him. A footman entered, looking nervous. "Begging your pardon, sir, but His Grace requests Delilah's presence in the library." Matthias's face darkened with concern. "Now? Whatever for?" "He says he wishes her to read to him." "From Scripture, sir. Says he's heard she knows her letters." Delilah's heart skipped a beat. Her father had indeed taught her to read, but such knowledge was unusual for a servant. She hadn't meant for anyone to know. In the library, Prince Leopold stood by a tall window, his back straight as a sword. He turned as Delilah curtsied deeply. "Your Grace called for me?" "Yes." His voice was quiet but firm. "I suffer from sleeplessness. Last night, your voice." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your reading would be a comfort in the evening hours. The Psalms, perhaps." Delilah's mind raced. To refuse would be impossible, yet to accept meant more gossip, more suspicious glances. But being known as a scripture reader was safer than being accused of idleness or worse. "I would be honored, your Grace," she said finally, keeping her eyes lowered. "Good. You will come to my chambers after the evening meal." That night, Delilah stood in Prince Leopold's private chamber, her heart thundering beneath her modest dress. The room was austere despite its grandeur, with heavy drapes and dark wooden furniture. A single candelabra cast warm light over the leather-bound Bible she held. "Begin with Psalm 23, the prince instructed, settling into a high-backed chair. Delilah's voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she read. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The familiar words filled the chamber like music. Prince Leopold sat motionless, but his eyes never left her face. The comfort of Scripture wrapped around them both like a warm cloak, creating an island of peace in the vast palace. As she read, he gripped his hands tightly behind his back, fighting the strange urge to reach out, to feel again that brief touch that had awakened something long dormant in his soul. The candlelight caught the gentle movement of her lips as she formed each word, and he found himself mesmerized by the quiet strength in her presence. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the council chamber, catching on powdered wigs and silk waistcoats as nobles gathered for the day's proceedings. Prince Leopold sat straight-backed in his carved chair, his face a careful mask as Duke Wilhelm paced before the assembled courtiers. The marble floors echoed with the click of the Duke's heels as he moved, his voice carrying across the chamber. "My dear nephew, the time has come to secure our realm's future." He paused, his shrewd eyes fixed on Leopold. "I have negotiated a most advantageous match with the House of Lorraine. Their Duchess, Lady Eleanor, will make a fitting bride." Leopold's fingers tightened imperceptibly on his chair's armrest, though his expression remained unchanged. "Indeed, uncle? And when was this arrangement made?" "The final terms were settled just yesterday." Duke Wilhelm's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The alliance will strengthen our borders and bring fresh blood to our line. Surely you see the wisdom in this?" Around the chamber, nobles nodded and murmured their approval. Leopold felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, of choices being stripped away one by one. Yet he merely inclined his head, as he had been trained to do since childhood. "We shall discuss the details in private, uncle," he said quietly. But the morning's discomfort was only beginning. As the council dispersed, whispers floated through the corridors like poison. "Have you heard?" Lady Sophia's fan fluttered as she spoke behind it. "A black maid in his chambers at night, reading scripture they say, but who knows what other arts she practices. Witchcraft perhaps," Count Müller supplied, his lip curling. "Why else would our prince suddenly break his solitude for a servant?" "Desperation." Another noble laughed unkindly. 20 years without a wife does strange things to a man's judgment." The whispers followed Leopold throughout the day, each one striking like a small knife. By evening, he sought the only peace he had known in recent days, the quiet hours of reading with Delilah. She stood as always by the candelabra, Bible in hand, but tonight he raised his hand before she could begin reading. "Tell me of your family," he said softly. "How came you to serve in this household?" Delilah hesitated, unused to such personal questions from nobility. "My father was a sailor, Your Grace. He carried a Dutch commission and served with honor for 15 years. Yet you speak of him in past tense. He died 3 years ago." Her voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened on the Bible's leather cover. "Despite his service, his death went unmarked because of his African birth. My mother worked herself to illness to keep us fed, and I came here to earn our bread." Leopold watched her face in the candlelight, saw the quiet dignity with which she bore her story. No self-pity, no bitterness, only strength and grace in the face of injustice. "You speak of such hardship without rancor," he observed. "Bitterness changes nothing, Your Grace. My father taught me that a person's worth lies not in how others see them, but in how they carry themselves despite it." Her words struck him deeply, carrying more wisdom than all the courtly philosophies he had studied. Here was true nobility, he realized, not in blood or title, but in spirit. Heavy snow had begun to fall outside his chamber window. Leopold stood watching the white flakes swirl in the torchlight, his breath fogging the glass. Movement in the courtyard below caught his eye. Delilah, wrapped in a thin shawl, carrying a heavy water pail across the snowy cobblestones. 2 servants passed her, a young man and woman. The man took the pail from her hands with a smile, their fingers touching freely in the exchange. The woman linked arms with Delilah, sharing warmth as they walked together. Leopold pressed his hand against the cold window glass, watching their easy companionship with an ache in his chest he had never known before. How strange, he thought, that those with the least should have the freedom he most desired, to touch, to embrace, to show kindness without scandal or consequence. While he stood in his gilded cage, they moved through the world heart first, unbound by the crushing weight of crown and duty. The snow continued to fall as he watched Delilah disappear into the servants' entrance, leaving him alone with thoughts he dared not name. The castle settled into evening's hush as servants lit the hallway sconces one by one. In his chambers, Prince Leopold paced before the hearth, his shadow dancing against tapestried walls. Sleep eluded him again, as it had so many nights before, but now he had a remedy that brought him peace. At his summons, Delilah arrived carrying the worn leather psalter. Her simple gray dress whispered against the floor as she curtsied. "Your Grace, the usual passages have lost their power tonight," Leopold admitted, settling into his chair. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Perhaps something different?" Delilah hesitated, her fingers tracing the psalter's brass clasps. "If Your Grace permits, I know a hymn my father taught me. It's not in Latin or German. Leopold's eyebrows lifted with interest. In what tongue, then? My father's native language, from the African coast. He said it was a prayer for peaceful rest. Sing it, Leopold said softly, please. Delilah closed her eyes, and a melody unlike anything Leopold had ever heard filled his chamber. The notes rose and fell like ocean waves, rich and deep, carrying centuries of longing in each syllable. Though he couldn't understand the words, their meaning reached past language to touch something ancient and true in his soul. His eyes drifted closed as the song wrapped around him like a warm embrace. For the first time in years, the constant tension in his shoulders began to ease. When the last note faded into silence, Leopold opened his eyes to find Delilah watching him with gentle concern. That was extraordinary, he murmured. Where did you learn such music? My father taught me on his ship, Your Grace. We'd sing together during the night watch, and he'd show me letters in his captain's log by lantern light. Letters? Leopold sat forward, surprised. You can write as well as read? Delilah nodded, a flash of pride crossing her features before modesty subdued it. Yes, Your Grace. In 3 languages, German, English, and Dutch. Father believed knowledge was the greatest gift he could give me, even if others thought it improper for a sailor's daughter, much less a servant. Leopold rose and crossed to Biddy, his desk, where charts and correspondence lay scattered. He picked up a letter written in a flowing Dutch hand. Can you read this? Delilah accepted the paper carefully. To His Grace, Prince Leopold of Saxony, greetings from the Dutch East India Company. She translated smoothly. We write to discuss terms of trade through your northern ports. Leopold watched her in growing amazement. Her pronunciation was perfect, her translation precise. This was no simple servant's education, but the careful cultivation of a keen mind. Your father gave you far more than letters, he said quietly. He gave you wings. He gave me hope, Delilah corrected gently. Hope that I might be judged by my character rather than my station. In that moment, Leopold saw her truly, not as a maid who happened to read, but as a soul as cultivated and dignified as any noble born to privilege. Her father's teachings had given her an inner refinement that no title could bestow. The candlelight caught the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet grace in her bearing. Without thinking, Leopold reached for her hand as she stood to leave. Her fingers were warm in his, slightly roughened from work but strong and sure. Time seemed to stop as they stood connected by that simple touch, far longer than propriety would ever allow. Delilah's voice came as barely a whisper when she finally pulled away. Your Grace, we must be careful. The court would destroy us both if they saw such a gesture. Let them try, Leopold said fiercely. But they both knew she spoke truth. Already rumors threatened her position, and his uncle's marriage plans loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. She stepped back, clutching the psalter to her chest like a shield. Good night, Your Grace, she murmured, and slipped away into the shadows of the corridor, leaving Leopold with the lingering warmth of her touch and the echo of her song in his heart. The winter morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight glinting off fresh snow that blanketed the palace grounds. Prince Leopold had surprised his household by announcing an outing to view the frozen river, something he hadn't done in years. Servants bustled about, preparing 3 carriages for the expedition. Delilah helped wrap heated bricks in flannel for the carriage floors, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She noticed the prince watching from the palace steps, his usual stern expression softened by what looked almost like anticipation. All the servants are to accompany us, he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Every member of my household should enjoy such a fine winter's day. The steward, Herr Matthias, raised his eyebrows but quickly organized everyone into the carriages. Noble guests claimed the first carriage with the prince, while servants filled the second and third. Delilah found herself in the last carriage, pressed between the cook and a chambermaid. The small procession wound its way through the snow-laden forest, hooves crunching on the packed road. Delilah caught glimpses of the prince's carriage ahead, its polished wood gleaming in the winter Sunday. Occasionally, she saw him glance back toward their carriage, though she told herself it meant nothing. Their peaceful journey ended abruptly when the prince's carriage lurched to one side. The wheel had sunk deep into a snowdrift, tilting the entire vehicle at a dangerous angle. Ladies shrieked inside while the coachman struggled with the reins. Without hesitation, Delilah leaped from her carriage. "Quick now," she called to the other servants. "We'll need branches for traction and everyone's strength to lift." The servants looked to Herr Matthias, who nodded gruffly. Delilah directed them with the efficiency of a ship's captain, just as she'd seen her father do during storms at sea. "Lay the branches before and behind the wheel," she instructed. "You four, brace the carriage from tipping. Everyone else, prepare to push on my count. A Countess in the prince's carriage sneered through the window. How dare a mere maid presume to give orders? But Prince Leopold's voice cut through the chaos. "Listen to her," he commanded, stepping down into the snow. "She knows what she's about." Under Delilah's guidance, the servants worked together like a well-oiled machine. "Now push," she called. 1, 2, 3. The carriage groaned, then lifted free of the drift. Within moments, it stood safely on solid ground again, ready to continue. "Well done," Leopold said, his eyes fixed on Delilah. "Quick thinking, and excellent leadership." The same countess who had complained stepped down, her lips twisted in disgust. "Really, Your Grace, to praise a servant so openly. And one of her background? It's most irregular." Leopold turned to face the noblewoman, his voice sharp as winter frost. "Irregular? I find nothing irregular about recognizing merit where it exists. This woman's quick actions prevented serious trouble today. Would you rather we remained stuck in the snow while waiting for someone of suitable birth to devise a solution?" A shocked silence fell over the gathering. Never had the prince spoken so forcefully in defense of a servant. The countess retreated into the carriage, properly chastened. The journey back to the palace was quiet, filled with whispered conversations and sidelong glances. As they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The chapel bells began to ring for evening vespers. To everyone's astonishment, Prince Leopold descended from his carriage and walked directly to where Delilah stood with the other servants. Without a word, he offered her his arm. Delilah's heart pounded as she placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her toward the chapel. The entire household fell in behind them, nobles and servants alike struck speechless by this unprecedented display. Inside the candlelit chapel, Leopold guided Delilah to the front pew, traditionally reserved for family. As the priest began the evening prayers, the prince kept hold of her hand, his fingers entwined with hers in full view of everyone present. Delilah felt the weight of every stare, heard the rustle of silk skirts and the sharp intake of breath from those around them. She knew this moment would change everything. There could be no pretense now, no hiding behind the masks of prince and servant. The scandal they had feared was no longer approaching, it had arrived. The prince's hand tightened on hers as the prayers continued, as if daring anyone to object to their joined fingers resting on the wooden pew. In the flickering candlelight, servants and nobles alike watched in stunned silence, understanding that their world had shifted irreversibly in this simple act of devotion. 2 nights after the chapel incident, soft candlelight flickered in the palace library. Delilah sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, a leather-bound volume of poetry open in her hands. Prince Leopold reclined in his own seat, eyes closed, listening to her melodic voice bring the verses to life. The peaceful moment shattered as a floorboard creaked near the partially open door. Leopold's eyes snapped open, and Delilah's voice faltered. But when they looked, only empty shadows greeted them in the doorway. Someone was watching. Delilah whispered, her fingers trembling slightly on the book's pages. "Let them watch," Leopold said, though his jaw tightened with concern. There is no shame in reading poetry. But by morning, the damage was done. Whispers raced through the palace halls like wildfire. Ladies gathered in corners, fans fluttering as they exchanged knowing looks. Servants huddled in the kitchen, casting fearful glances when Delilah passed. "Witchcraft," one noblewoman hissed to another over breakfast. "How else could a common maid enchant our prince so thoroughly? Did you see how he held her hand in chapel?" Another replied. "No natural influence could make a man of his station forget himself so completely." The rumors reached Duke Wilhelm's ears as he sat in his private chamber. His face darkened with each new report from his spies. The foreign duchess was due to arrive within the month, and his carefully laid plans for alliance through marriage were unraveling. "This servant girl must be dealt with," he muttered to his secretary. "Find me something, anything, to remove her from the prince's presence." Later that morning, Delilah was cornering in a quiet corridor by two ladies-in-waiting, their silk skirts rustling like angry snakes as they approached. "Well, if it isn't the prince's pet witch," the first lady sneered, her painted lips curling. "Tell us, girl," the second added, "what spells did your savage father teach you? What foreign potions have you slipped into his grace's wine?" Delilah lifted her chin, though her heart hammered in her chest. "My father was a Christian man who served with honor on Dutch ships. I have used no spells or potions, only honest service and respect." "Honest?" The first lady laughed coldly. "There is nothing honest about a black servant rising above her station. Mark our words, Wales, you'll be dragged through these halls in chains before the week is out. Duke Wilhelm will see to that." "The truth will protect me," Delilah responded, her voice steady despite her fear. "Truth?" The second lady stepped closer, her perfume cloying in the air. "Truth is what those in power say it is. And you, girl, have no power here." They swept away, leaving Delilah alone in the corridor. Only then did she allow herself to tremble, pressing her hand against the cold stone wall for support. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back, remembering her father's words. "Stand tall, my girl. God sees your heart, even when others refuse to." The day passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. As midnight approached, Delilah sat in her small chamber in the servants' quarters, a single candle burning. As she read her father's worn Bible for comfort, the heavy tread of boots in the corridor made her look up. Sharp knocks rattled her door. "Open in the name of Duke Wilhelm." With shaking fingers, Delilah unlatched the door. 4 palace guards stood outside, their faces grim in the torchlight. "Delilah Weber, you are under arrest for the theft of the silver crucifix from His Grace's private chapel," the lead guard announced. "You will come with us immediately." "I have stolen nothing," Delilah protested, but rough hands already gripped her arms. A sudden draft swept through the corridor. Her candle flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the guards' torches. As they dragged her from her chamber, Delilah caught a glimpse of Duke Wilhelm watching from the shadows, satisfaction clear on his face. The sound of her boots scraping against the floor echoed through the dark corridors as the guards pulled her away, leaving her small chamber, and her dreams of dignity, behind in the darkness. Morning light filtered weakly through the high windows of the palace's Hall of Justice, doing little to warm the chill stone walls. Nobles wrapped in fur-lined cloaks huddled together on wooden benches, their breath visible in the cold air. At the front of the hall, 3 stern-faced judges sat behind a heavy oak table, their black robes a stark contrast to the white winter light. Duke Wilhelm stood to one side, his face a mask of grave concern as he watched Delilah being led in by palace guards. Her simple gray dress was wrinkled from her night in custody, but she held her head high despite the whispers that followed her entrance. Prince Leopold sat apart from the others, his face pale and drawn. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night. His hands, usually so still and controlled, gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles whitened. "The tribunal will now commence," announced the chief judge, his voice echoing in the hushed hall. "Delilah Weber stands accused of most grievous crimes against the Principality of Saxony." Duke Wilhelm stepped forward, his boots clicking against the stone floor. "Your honors, we present evidence of theft, witchcraft, and the seduction of a royal heir, crimes that strike at the very heart of our noble house." One by one, Wilhelm's carefully chosen witnesses came forward. A kitchen maid claimed she had seen Delilah muttering strange incantations over the prince's wine cup. A footman swore he had caught her sneaking from the chapel with something silver hidden in her apron, though he could not say exactly when. A lady-in-waiting described suspicious herbs found among Delilah's belongings. And most damning, Wilhelm continued, producing a silver crucifix from beneath his cloak. This sacred object was discovered hidden beneath the accused's bed linens this very morning. Delilah's eyes widened. "That is not true," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I have never seen that crucifix before." "Silence," commanded one of the judges. You will speak only when questioned directly. The chief judge turned to where Prince Leopold Saturday, Your Grace, you have spent considerable time in the accused's presence. The court requires your testimony regarding her character and actions. Leopold rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the hall upon him. His uncle's stern gaze reminded him of duty, of the marriage alliance that would secure their borders, of generations of noble blood that must be preserved. But when he looked at Delilah, he saw only truth and dignity in her eyes. He began, then faltered. The words of condemnation stuck in his throat. Your Grace, Wilhelm prompted sharply, surely you see now how this woman has attempted to bewitch you, to turn you from your proper path and sacred duties. Leopold's hands clenched at his sides. The silence in the hall grew heavier with each passing moment. My only crime, Delilah's clear voice suddenly rang out, was to serve faithfully and well. She looked directly at Leopold as she continued. I have never stolen, never practiced witchcraft, never sought to seduce or mislead. I have only tried to live with honor, as my father taught me. Her words pierced Leopold's heart like an arrow. He saw in that moment all that she was, her strength, her grace, her unwavering spirit. And he saw his own cowardice in staying silent. But before he could speak, the chief judge raised his hand. The evidence is clear. This woman has used her foreign ways to attempt corruption of royal blood. She will be confined to the palace prison until further judgment is passed. No. The word escaped Leopold's lips, but it came too late. The guards stepped forward with iron chains. Delilah did not resist as they closed the manacles around her wrists, though a single tear tracked down her cheek. Outside the high windows, snow began to fall, thick and silent, muffling the murmurs of the crowd as they watched her being led away. Leopold stood frozen, knowing he had failed her in the moment she needed him most. The soft hiss of falling snow seemed to mock his silence as Delilah disappeared through the heavy wooden doors, leaving only the empty echo of chains in the cold morning air. Evening shadows crept across Prince Leopold's private chamber as he paced before the crackling fire. His boots wore a path in the thick carpet, while his mind replayed the morning's terrible events. The flames cast his shadow long against the wall, making him appear as restless as his thoughts. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Delilah standing proud before the tribunal. Despite the chains, despite the lies, she had shown more nobility than any of the silk-clad courtiers who condemned her. Her quiet dignity haunted him more than any ghost. I am a coward, he whispered to the empty room. A prince who cannot protect one innocent soul is no prince at all. The fire popped and hissed, reminding him of her words from nights ago when she had read to him by candlelight. True nobility lies not in blood, but in kindness given. She had spoken it so simply, yet the truth of it had lodged in his heart like an arrow. Leopold stopped his pacing abruptly. No more, he declared to the silent chamber. No more hiding behind duty and custom while injustice prevails. He yanked the bell pull with unusual force, summoning his personal secretary. When the startled man arrived, Leopold was already pulling on his coat. Summon the archive clerks, he commanded. Every one of them. I want all naval records from the Dutch Commission for the past 30 years. Send writers to the port authorities in Hamburg and Bremen. I want every ship's manifest, every pilot's log. The secretary blinked in surprise but bowed quickly. At this hour, Your Grace? Every hour until we find what we seek. Leopold's voice carried the authority he had too long left unused. And send for Father Anselm. I require his assistance. Within the hour, his private study was transformed into a makeshift archive. Clerks huddled over yellowed papers by candlelight, while writers departed into the snowy night, carrying urgent messages. Father Anselm arrived wearing a concerned expression, his gray hair disheveled as if he'd hurried from his prayers. Your Grace? The chaplain inquired softly. How may I serve? Leopold drew him aside, speaking in low tones. Father, you have access to the church records of marriages and commissions. I need proof of Delilah Weber's father's service as a naval pilot. He carried a Dutch commission. She spoke truth of this. I know it in my heart. The old priest's eyes widened with understanding. Ah, he said, a small smile touching his lips. Truth will out, as scripture tells us. I shall search the records myself. Hours passed in a blur of dusty papers and guttering candles. Leopold refused to rest, examining each document himself despite his secretary's protests. His determination seemed to inspire the others. Even the most junior clerks worked without complaint, as midnight came and went. Near the second hour past midnight, Father Anselm's excited whisper cut through the quiet scratch of quills. "Your Grace, come quickly." The priest's gnarled fingers pointed to an entry in a leather-bound volume. There, in faded but clear ink, was the record. Heinrich Weber, commissioned pilot under Dutch authority, having proved his skill and good character, granted rights to navigate merchant vessels in service to the Crown, Anno Domini 1652. Leopold's hands trembled as he took the book. "There is more," Father Anselm said, producing a second document from his robes. From the marriage records, Heinrich Weber wed Maria Schmidt, daughter of a freeman of Bremen. All properly witnessed and blessed. Her parents were legally wed. Leopold breathed. Her father a commissioned officer. She spoke truth in all things. The prince carefully gathered the precious documents, checking each seal and signature. With reverent care, he tucked them into his coat, close to his heart. The candles had burned low, their light flickering against the pre-dawn darkness outside the frost-covered windows. "I will face the court when day breaks," he whispered, more to himself than to the watching priest. "Let them see what true nobility means. Let them witness that love and truth matter more than ancient blood." Father Anselm laid a weathered hand on Leopold's arm. "It may cost you dearly, Your Grace." Leopold straightened his shoulders, feeling stronger than he had in years. "Even if it costs my crown," he said firmly, "I will not let another innocent soul suffer for my cowardice." Through the windows, the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. A new day was coming, and with it, the chance to finally stand for what was right. Morning light filtered through the great hall's towering windows, catching dust motes that swirled around the assembled nobility. Powdered wigs gleamed like fresh snow as courtiers shifted in their seats, watching Duke Wilhelm's triumphant smile. Priests swung censers back and forth, filling the air with sweet smoke that could not mask the sour scent of injustice. The Duke rose, papers rustling in his hands. "Let us conclude this unfortunate business. Hold." Prince Leopold's voice rang through the hall like a bell. Every head turned as he strode down the center aisle, his boot heels striking the marble floor. In his hands, he carried a leather folio. "Your Grace." Wilhelm's voice held barely concealed irritation. "We have already established the accused's guilt. You have established nothing but your own prejudice." Leopold's words cut through the incense-laden air. He turned to face the assembly, drawing himself to his full height. "I have here proof of Delilah Weber's heritage, her father's Dutch commission as a naval pilot, signed and sealed. Here too are the church records of her parents' legal marriage." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Leopold held the documents high. "This woman you so quickly condemned comes from a line of service and honor. Her father guided ships through treacherous waters, saving countless lives. Her own character shows the same courage and dignity." Wilhelm's face darkened. "Even if true, it changes nothing. She remains unsuitable." "For what?" Leopold's voice grew stronger. "For love? For respect? For marriage to a prince?" He turned in a slow circle, meeting the stunned gazes of the assembled court. "If loving her brands me unfit to rule, then I shall be unfit but not untrue." Gasps echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The foreign duchess, Lady Eleanor, rose from her seat, silk skirts rustling. "I too must speak." Her clear voice carried authority. "I was to be the prince's bride, yet I have watched in silence as this innocent woman suffered. No more." She stepped forward, her eyes bright. "I have seen Delilah's virtue, her strength, her dignity. These are the qualities we should value in our rulers' consorts, not merely ancient bloodlines." The hall erupted in whispers. Wilhelm's face had gone pale, his carefully constructed plot crumbling before him. The Chief Justice leaned forward, examining the documents Leopold had provided. After what seemed an eternity, he nodded. "The charges are without merit. Release the prisoner." The sound of chains falling to the marble floor echoed through the sudden silence. Delilah stepped forward, her simple dress a stark contrast to the finery around her. Though her hands trembled, her head remained high. Leopold crossed to her, taking her hand in his before the entire assembly. This time, there was no hesitation, no shame, only pride and love shining in his eyes as he faced his court with the woman who had taught him the true meaning of nobility. The winter sun rose golden over Saxony, painting the snow-covered village in shades of amber and rose. Outside the ancient stone church, peasants gathered in their Sunday best, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the unprecedented their prince wedding a maid. Inside, nobles shifted in their seats, their whispers echoing off the vaulted ceiling, but none dared voice opposition after the tribunal's verdict. The church doors opened, and Delilah stepped into the light. Though her gown was simple white wool rather than silk, she carried herself with such natural grace that even the most critical courtiers fell silent. Winter sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across her path as she walked down the aisle, her dark eyes fixed on Leopold. At the altar, the prince stood transformed. Gone was the withdrawn recluse who had hidden from human touch. In his place stood a man of purpose and conviction, his eyes bright with love as he watched his bride approach. The candlelight caught the silver threading in his formal coat, but it was his smile that truly gleamed. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the packed church. The traditional words took on new meaning as Leopold and Delilah exchanged their vows, their voices clear and unwavering. When the priest raised his hands in blessing, the amen that followed came from noble and common throats alike. Afterward, in the palace's great hall, the new couple received their subjects. Delilah, now a princess, knelt gracefully beside the very hearth where weeks ago she had begged to stay warm. Leopold took her hand, raising her up before all assembled. "My wife," he declared, pressing his lips to her fingers. The gesture spoke volumes. Here was a marriage of equals, founded on virtue rather than advantage. Nobles who had once scorned her now bowed deeply, while village folk offered simple gifts and heartfelt blessings. The palace steward, Matthias, presented them with a bound volume of psalms, his gruff voice softening as he wished them joy. As evening fell, Leopold led Delilah to their shared chamber. The last glow of sunset filtered through frosted windowpanes as he drew her into his arms at last. Outside, snow began to fall in gentle swirls, but within the palace walls, warmth bloomed like spring, a new chapter opening, built on love's power to redeem and transform. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.